imagine with me for just a moment here that you've heard some music and it's inspired you, and you now want to go and create your own beats, your own type of music, and you've got maybe some proficiency in computers and technology, but music theory, things like that have passed you by. You've never had that opportunity. You're essentially me but 15 years ago. When I started out having an interest in music and audio production, the first opportunity I got was radio station work, recording and working on some vocals. This eventually led into me doing the mastering side for broadcast. But when I wanted to dive deeper and start experimenting, creating my own music, well, it was a whole different world. And one of the first things that I purchased was an M-Audio Axiom keyboard, with the promise of it had these pads that I could control. It was a short 2, maybe 3 octave keyboard. It had some pads so I could do my drums. It had 2 octaves so I could play basic melodies and chords. And it was supposed to have this integrated ability to start and stop the transport controls on the door, so I could hit record, start recording, it's going to work straight away. And the controls are supposed to link in and control other parts of the DAW. And to be honest, none of it ever really worked. The setup and control side was so unbelievably tedious. However, this changes the game. You see here, the Arturia Keylab comes in at the bottom price of the budget keyboard. You're looking around £200, $250 for a full-size keyboard, not this little 2 octave thing, which, to be honest, I've used for many years, but I do outgrow when I want to do something extreme like move 3 octaves up in a sweep, for example, or a complex chord line with bottom chords and higher notes that are just out of range. This has some of the most incredible tools I've seen integrated directly into the keyboard. There's no additional software to load. You don't have to look for compatible plugins to run in the software, and you don't have limitations like the notes you played not being translated into your DAW, instead getting a single note and the plugin doing the translation like you find with many chord plugins. This really is game changing for someone who is getting into music production and looking to pick up their first keyboard to control their DAW, to get down their ideas and to not get bogged down in limitations. For example, let's say you found a sample that is in D minor and you kind of know your way around the keyboard, but you're not 100% on all the keys that are available to you and the chords that are available to you in D minor. Well, in the past, you would load up maybe a chord plugin, you'd look up what keys are in and you'd fumble around on the keyboard to try and figure that out. Well, with this keyboard, you can simply dial into D minor. It will show you exactly the keys that are within the key, but if you make a mistake and press a wrong key, it will correct it and output the right key. Even myself, whereas I've been playing around with the keyboard now for a decade and a half, hell, probably longer, every now and then I'll move into a key that I'm not as familiar with and I kind of fumble around and I'll press wrong keys and make mistakes. This could alleviate that and speed up workflow, and in the end of the day, the enjoyment of my creativity. Sure, it could lead to some laziness in learning and progression, but anything that enables creativity and workflow to me is a good thing. And the Key Lab Essential here comes with a tool called Melodics, which will allow you to massively develop your keyboard playing and teaches you in a really intuitive way that you can learn which fingers and where should be going on what keys for what chord progressions. And it will help you really evolve your playing and skill set if you want to do that, but you're not limited to. If you press the chord button, it will give you a variety of different options that can be triggered with a single note. And when scale is also enabled, it will restrict those chords to that particular scale, allowing you to then use the split keyboard function to have chords played on your left hand with one finger, and you can play out your melody on the right hand. It's also a shame there isn't any aftertouch, but aftertouch isn't really a deal breaker, especially at this price point. And I will note that we also get pads, and they are really nice pressure sensitive pads. I especially like the light ability, so when we're pressing we can see the velocity press relative to how bright it glows if you operate in a nice dark creative environment like I do. And all of these things are configured perfectly to your DAW. You see, we have these 3 pro program modes. We can find by pressing the program buttons to cycle through all three. We can press and hold it and tap pad 1 through 3, instantly move over to each one. I'm using Logic here, for example, and when in DAW mode, the middle control here allows me to navigate through the session, moving up and down to my different channels. And pressing in here will open up the instrument associated with that particular channel. What's really neat here, if we open up something like Alchemy, 8 of the 9 knobs here are automatically assigned to the macro controls inside Alchemy, for example, and so are the sliders, with the 9th being assigned to pan and volume of the channel always. So you always have that control and you don't have to kind of fumble about and remember what one it is. They're surprisingly premium for this budget range. The knobs have a nice resistance to them and they spin really comfortably, and you can't, well, just pull them off like my considerably more expensive Complete Control. The sliders also have a little bit of resistance. It's not feedback, but you just know where you are. You can't tap the slider and instantly move it because everything's happening firmware side from the keyboard itself. Everything is always captured in your DAW. I mentioned before that we use chord plugins and some other softwares which will only give you the single note that you've pressed for, say, an arpeggio. You won't be able to then go in and manipulate that arpeggio. You're restricted to the plugin and the software side doing it. Everything happens inside the keyboard, meaning your output is the exact arpeggio, chord or melody that you played, and you can completely manipulate it afterwards as well in a MIDI editor to make minor corrections, change how something moves, bump it up a chord, whatever you desire. The freedom is there for you. Now, we alluded to melodics being included. Arturia also including Analog Lab 5, and it comes fully fledged and included, but also has an integration option here. It's one of the program modes that we can switch into, and when we switch into it, we can browse presets, we can instantly control and adjust and tweak them all from the keyboard themselves. If Analog Lab somehow isn't satiating that need for pianos, they've also included 2 fantastic pianos from Native Instruments and UVI, both of which sound absolutely stunning and, again, integrate and work pretty much flawlessly. I/O wise, we're relatively limited, but there is a MIDI out, so we can route this into a hardware synth and have all this firmware side control go directly to that synth, which is very useful. I would love an option that I could open up an effects channel on my channel strip in Logic and have the 8 controls linked to that as well, especially as Arturia does a fantastic effects suite. It is just an absolutely fantastic piece of kit and I can't recommend it enough. It is staying right here in my system. I'm considering moving it to the large keyboard tray below and perhaps moving the MPC or machine up here in front of me instead. I could start experimenting with things a little bit more without hitting creative blocks and fumbling around when I'm on a deadline, which is fantastic. If you have any further questions about it, please leave it in the comment below and I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care.